Well, yes, of course, we had a very good introduction to this panel. It's all about cost of goods, but it's beyond cost of goods. It's about manufacturability, robustness. It's about products in the market. And today we have a fantastic panel that really represents the industry in terms of CMOs, but also we have a representative of a biotechnology company. So if my panel could, and they will join, so I'm going to start introducing everyone. So we have Dr. Janet Downie from Roslin Biosciences, and Janet has been involved with Roslin for how many years? 10 years, so really working on the heart of it, really developing these products in terms of innovation, but also in terms of industrial lots. And as everybody knows, Roslin is based in Edinburgh. We have also Thomas Fellner, who is the head of commercial development at Lonza. Lonza is a well-known manufacturer of a variety of biologics, including, obviously, proteins, viruses, and cell-based therapeutics. We have Dr. Ryan Guest from CTL. CTL is the biotech company of the panel, right? Founded by Sir Martin Evans. And we hope to hear about how you plan to deliver those products to the market and represent, in so doing, the rest of the biotechnological companies. Last but not least, we have Phil Vanek from GE Healthcare. Phil has a long experience as well in cell therapies, working previously at Lonza, so brings as well this understanding of manufacturing, manufacturability, and process robustness. But now with GE to try to develop and enhance quality, access, and affordability of healthcare, which is a GE motto, I would say, and this is what we're going to talk about today. So we prepared a long list of questions, but of course what we would very much like is to hear what the audience cares about. So I'm going to try to engage the audience as much as possible. But let's start with the first of the question we thought was particularly important was technology transfer. And I'll start with you, Phil, first. In your experience at Lonza and now your experience at GE, how easy it is, of course it's not, but what is the best practice in terms of technology transfer?
It's a great starting question. I think that we go back into translational research in the space where the therapies are being developed. It's largely, we often comment about the biology. It's the therapeutic benefit. It's the performance of that treatment in clinic. It's the advancement. Not a lot of thought is given at that point in time to, is it even manufacturable? Is it scalable? Is it as de-risked a process as possible? So that process of moving from a translational mindset where the thinking is largely around efficacy and around sort of the clinical care, and then moving it into an industrial and an industrializable ecosystem brings a lot of challenges with it. So it's a shift in mindset. I know we had that discussion this morning. It's also a sort of an awareness of GMP processes and improvements, quality, risk, et cetera. So I think the simple answer is it's a mind shift.
It's a mind shift. So we're going to keep the biotech representative for last. So
Okay.
Let's move on to Roslin, to the Edinburgh practice. Please tell us how easy it is. Of course, it's not. How important it is. What is the best practice to make a technology transfer successful?
Thanks. So Roslin Cell Therapies, we're a CDMO in the cell and gene therapy space, as you said, based in Edinburgh. And over the last 10 years, we've done a number of different tech transfers from academic groups or from small companies. They are either academic processes or well-developed processes that we transfer into manufacture. And I think kind of resoundingly, the issue around technology transfer is, one, the process. The process itself needs to be a robust process, but there's also the communication element. And I think what we find is to have a successful tech transfer, you have to have really well-documented processes, but actually transfer all of that knowledge. And for us as the CDMO, it's important that the failures, the difficulties with the process are communicated to the CMO so that we can really, really understand it. The other thing that we find is that there tends to be a real focus on the actual process and not so much on the in-process control testing, the release testing, and that's something when we transfer in a process that we work with our clients with to kind of develop, because it seems to be like an afterthought quite often. But I think kind of for me, the success really comes down to the partnership and actually really understanding that transfer of knowledge, because unless you have that, there's such complex processes that you'll have failure.
So here what we are saying as well, that there is a huge component in terms of alliance management, and that needs to be done properly. We're using very standard practice to increase trust and communication and the flow of information. What is a practice at Lonza to make this happen, to ensure this happens every time, all the time, at the correct time?
All the time is a good point.
But
before I answer your question directly, I want to just iterate here. The biggest challenge we see right now is that there is quite a lot of companies in phase 3 or at the edge of phase 3. And we are working very closely with those companies, and when you say tech transfer, you can mean tech transfer even internally within a company or from outside within a company like a CMO. And the big challenge we see that they are now entering phase 3, and there is a lack of a very good understanding how do you even get to the point of having a commercially viable process and product. Right? And it's understandable, the industry is a very young industry, and most companies are focused on showing efficacy, and not enough attention was spent on developing good manufacturing strategies. So this is one of the largest hurdle the field is experiencing right now, that they're very close to commercialization, but still there is quite a lot to do in order to have a technology available, a manufacturing process available that allows you to be commercially viable.
Okay, that's a great point. We are really reaching out to the first stages of commercialization. That's going to be the focus of the next question. But before that, I would like to hear Ryan's views on how to have a successful tech transfer and how you wish to partner with the CMOs who are your partners here. And again, in your position of head of the GMP, that is really hardcore manufacturing at CTL.
I mean, the key to us is understanding the critical attributes that product has. And all of those will lead to you understanding how you're going to make it. So, as you were just saying, currently it's all been about getting products into clinics, getting them into patients, and don't worry too much about how you do it just now. We'll solve all those hurdles later on. So one of the keys for us was we've come directly from academia. We know those key critical attributes. We focus on the cell as a clinical and quality product. And once you start there, then you can look at the criteria and the assays to prove that you've got that critical quality product. And then you can work on each of the different stages. So when we work with a partner, we'll often go in and watch how they do it and why they do it. And when you learn about all those little things that you don't think are very important, actually, those are the things that you have to concentrate on. So nothing small is missed when you come up with your final manufacturing process. So the key to us is understanding those key critical attributes.
Can I add one last comment to that? Sorry, but as I'm listening to this, the one thing that we sometimes miss is in that translational stage, we're really thinking about that clinical effectiveness and maybe thinking about treating 5, 10, 15 patients per year. But when you start to think about what a commercial demand could be in the tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of patients, it's not a disconnect, but there's this kind of notion that, well, what works here will just work there, but we'll just have to do it bigger, faster, harder. And I think that has to shift a little bit. But you can't design a 30,000, 50,000 patient cohort in the clinic. So,
well, that's a great point, and we need to explore this actually further. Is how do we prepare as a company, as a biotech company, as a university like UCL with various immuno-oncology companies? How do we prepare for commercially commercial stage manufacturing, which is a totally different game, actually. So let's start with Roslin.
I mean, I guess it's a bit cliche, but I think you really have to start with the end in mind and have that plan right through to the commercial endpoint. I think, as Ryan said, there's this rush to get to the clinic because that's a sort of milestone. But in some ways, there's a false economy in doing that too quickly without investing in the process development, absolutely nailing the process and understanding how you're going to scale it. So I think really investing in that process development, understanding your scalability and calculating costs of goods at an early stage and understanding viability in terms of the product going forward.
I'd like to add to that as well. I think one of the things we've noticed is there's this sort of change from the classic pharma approach of let's do loads of patients and see how it works. It's far more small-scale trials, doing little changes and tweaks, both in the delivery of the therapies, but also in the targets, rather than let's do 100 patients with this target. There's definitely been a big change in that, and that's probably around that, reducing the cost of understanding where your changes need to come in, so that you can then do your...
And don't underestimate the cost of changing once you go into sort of GMP manufacture. I mean, a change in development can be relatively cheap, but once you move into manufacture, you've done phase 1 and you want to redevelop your process, it becomes really costly at that point.
So I could summarize this. It's the same thing as traditional, conventional pharmaceutical manufacturing, yet it's different, right? So how different is it for Lonza? What is Lonza's view?
So first of all, it's also the CMO's responsibility to work with the companies that are developing these therapies, right? Because I've observed this now over the years where you treat the client as, okay, the client tells you what to do, the client is always right. And there was a little bit this mindset, but lately we have made a drastic shift of saying, no, it's actually our responsibility, and especially the CMOs that have been around a while and have a lot of experience in biologics manufacturing, to actually help them to see where they need to be. And it doesn't have to. That doesn't mean you need to invest millions of dollars up front when you're in phase 1, but you need to provide the outlook. Where are you now? Where do you, or where will you be? And as Phil said, I mean, manufacturing 10,000, 100,000 doses. It's not only manufacturing. I mean, a lot of people forget about fill finish. I mean, how do you fill 100,000 doses? People will say, no, that's easy because in biologics that has been done, right? Not a big deal. No, it's not that simple. It's a huge challenge. And I tell you, there are groups that are at that stage and they have a wake-up call right now. They're getting a wake-up call because how do you all of a sudden make this substantial change at such a late stage?
Comments from GE?
Yeah, no, I think all the comments made are pretty spot on. It's if you sort of back up a little bit, the technologies that are available to the therapies that are being made today, and the approaches and the processes used to manufacture those therapies today, A, were probably invented 10 or 15 years ago. B, we borrowed from the blood industry, the bioprocess industry, so the tools haven't evolved to keep up with the type of production that's coming or that will be needed. So it's a combination, and it's almost that perfect storm of old manufacturing technologies, old processes, and a world that is sort of, to use your point, is waking up to this, ooh, this is a bit different than we had anticipated. Those things are now converging, and I think there is a rush to catch up. So we want better viral production, we want better bioreactors, we want better fill finish. But we are, as an industry that provides tools and technologies, is rushing to keep up with that.
Right. So to try to summarize this, it's very much, and I like the word convergence, really it's converging with this totally novel technology, but yet fitting it in the traditional, conventional model of pharma manufacturing. And the reason why it's important, we want pharma companies to adopt this product at some stage, right? Because we have exquisite incremental development capabilities. They have very good understanding of manufacturing as well, even though there are some intrinsic characteristics here that are not quite understood. But on the other hand, in terms of marketing and sales, they have a network that we really want to tap into.
Yeah, there's one comment I want to make here, because we are already assuming that the pharma companies are in control of developing the manufacturing strategy. That's in most cases not true, right? It's the smaller companies, there is an invention, a spin-out, spin-off, and then there's the phase 1, phase 2 trials, and then pharma will come in. But at this time, when they come in and license or buy, there should already be a good strategy in place. I mean, if it's developed within a pharma company and we see this, yes, they have all the people, they have all the experience to develop these sophisticated manufacturing processes. But that's, for most companies, not the case.
Yeah, a lot of education and permeation of knowledge and knowledge transfer need to occur. Any burning question from the audience regarding how to prepare to manufacturing, please?
I just wanted to ask a slightly policy-related question, and that is the extent to which the hospital exemption may be standing in the way of moving us forward.
But I'm thinking maybe that's the break. This looks like people serve like coffee and mini pastries, and then coffee and fresh fruit, then lunch.
Well, it's a slightly different topic, but let's take the...
I'd like to answer that in two ways. I suppose it's two things. One of the key things about the hospital exemptions was it was allowed patients to prove efficacy, treatments to be proven in efficacy. But I think ultimately, if you want to get to the stage of making these marketed medicines, that's just not going to be viable, especially as it's done under a particular patient clinician's oversight, and it's one hospital can do it. That's really not going to achieve the thousands of patients that we want to treat in these therapies.
Actually, we can expand this view on manufacturing from the teeny tiny low scale of the hospital laboratories or GMP unit to really the much larger operations, again, in terms of pharmas, right? What we want is those vectors, those viruses, to be produced in the very large scale, distributed broadly at a cheap cost of goods. And for this, we need to leverage economies of scale, economies of scope, essentially do what industrialization needs to do. Now, there is a question about manufacturing hubs, and pharma companies like to go in tax havens, like Ireland, Singapore, Puerto Rico. So what would be the view of replicating that model for cell therapy and gene therapy? Phil, let's start with you.
It's a great question. We tend to be a bit agnostic about where and how things get made, as long as it's made with a GE product and GE supporting it. I say that a bit tongue-in-cheek because we do recognize that there are other technologies. What is interesting, I think, is that, and maybe it's addressing a little bit of this hospital exemption question, is there is this quasi-treatment mindset, quasi-drug mindset, and what that really tells me is that there is this necessary convergence, again, another convergence of the drug manufacturing pharmaceutical industry and the clinical centers. So we have clinical centers that are now starting to file INDs and put their own drug through the process, and we've got pharmaceutical companies who are starting to question how will we deliver these medicines and treat these. So whether it's a tax haven or a production, I think you're going to have potentially two models, and I'll let the other panelists weigh in on which their favorite model is, but you can have a decentralized sort of production regionally, and then that gets shipped to the clinical center. But I also think that you'll see clinical centers of excellence that have manufacturing sites within their own facility. There's a lot of clinical and technical sort of overlap and requirements that have to be checked off to make sure those things happen, but I think that the real point is there will be an evolution. I think both models will eventually sort of prevail, and it may ultimately be driven by efficiency and what is and the best. And final comment is it really depends on what the therapy is, whether it's an autologous or an allogeneic, a modified cell, a non-modified cell. So I think we're going to sort of, the next few years will tell quite a bit in terms of what path we finally take.
Thanks. So Thomas, what's the viewpoint of Lonza as an international company? And you have a choice of jurisdictions, right? You operate in Singapore, in Switzerland, obviously, elsewhere.
Yeah, as you said, I mean, we have sites all over the world, and specifically for gene and cell therapy, we have sites in Singapore, right? That was already mentioned as has tax advantages, let's put it this way. We have now a site in Japan. We have sites in the United States. We don't have a site yet in Europe. And we're always getting asked, why don't you have a site in Europe? First of all, you're a Swiss company. And second of all, there is a substantial market there. Yes, both facts are true. And then coming back to what Phil said, right? In the end, it comes down to what is the product. If this is a fresh product, what do I mean by fresh product? It's a product that is not going to be frozen before administered to a patient, and your half-life, shelf life, whatever you want to call it, is like 16 hours, 24 hours. Well, it doesn't make a lot of sense to manufacture this in Singapore, in the United States, right? If you do the treatments in Europe. But let me also assure you that these therapies will struggle long-term to survive, right? So now coming to a global footprint. If you look at a frozen product, right, at the classic pharma model, you make something, you fill it up, you put it in a freezer, and then it can stay there for years. And there are good logistics companies that ship it all over the world. There's no reason why they're not doing it in Singapore. Some companies might say, well, for me, there's a tax incentive, so that's why I want to go to Singapore. But in the end, it will also come down to capacity. And again, I'm not talking about phase 1-2 manufacturing, I'm talking about commercial manufacturing, right? What capacity is available? Well, there's capacity in Singapore available, there's capacity in the US available, in Portsmouth, for example. Okay, you have a choice, but if there's no capacity available, you will most likely have to go to Singapore or to Portsmouth, and you don't have any other options. And it shouldn't matter in the end. It shouldn't matter. And pharma companies act exactly the same way, right? I mean, we manufacture biologics for European companies all the way in Asia, China.
Yes, so let's take the view of a different CMO, which is more local. Nothing wrong with that, actually. But do you try to work with the national government, or the local government, sorry, I meant, to try to have these tax incentives that you can use to decrease the cost of goods and attract clients and companies?
No, absolutely.
And jobs?
I mean, I think there's probably 2 points from a manufacturing perspective. In terms of sort of skilled manufacturing, one of the key things in location is having skilled workforce. And I think having built that where we are, it's very hard to then move that and have that skill set. But thinking about the UK as a location, I'm part of the UK task force for ATMPs, and that's actually working really closely with government. We had a meeting yesterday, and there's an awful lot being done in the UK to make the UK the place to come for manufacturing, tax incentives, skills development. There's a real kind of drive and appetite to make the UK really attractive, because obviously we've got the experience in biologics and larger scale manufacturing. So actually for cell therapies, for us it makes a lot of sense to be in the UK. But I think for us we're looking globally and looking at, well, it's not just about working within the European regulations, it's making sure that we can comply with the FDA regulations, and therefore we can manufacture here and ship to the US. And I think, as Thomas says, there are some therapies at the moment that are not frozen, they're fresh, and you then have to look at the location. But I think going forward, for these therapies to be sustainable, they have to be frozen products, and therefore that issue goes away. So, but I think there will be some hubs that are close to hospitals, that are centres where you have clinicians that have a real appetite to take the therapies forward as well.
Yeah, Jacques Galipo, Professor Galipo, likes to say stem cells is like sushi, fresh is better. But then again, sometimes easy sushi is also useful, right? In terms of CTL, right, for your commercialization, do you have any particular view, or you're agnostic?
I suppose our feeling is, so we manufacture TIL as our own product, but we also make TCR and CARs, and we've got a lot of experience in that field. And when these problems that we're talking about now, we were thinking about them probably 6 or 7 years ago. So we've been working on the technologies to sort out the logistics and bring in, I mean, one of ours is tumour derived T cells. And if you think of that, that's probably one of the logistical problems that nobody wants to sort out. But that's what we're trying to do. And we understand that ultimately we can't have patients that fly to Manchester for every treatment we do. So we're bringing in the new technologies and novel IP around how those tissues are collected at source and can be stably transported anywhere in the world, so that the product can get manufactured in a low occupancy pathway, because that's the other problem that we don't talk about much, is how much a product is occupying your manufacturing facility, how long it's going to be there for, and therefore that cost is a cost that you can't recover once you've given it back to the patient. So these are key. And I think the other one that we don't talk about much as well is that we've thought about how we're going to make the product, we've thought about how we're going to infuse the product, but we haven't thought about is how hospitals are going to change to have these products coming through them all the time. And that's another change that has to be thought about. And it's not really us as manufacturers, but we've got to help in it. It's as a global industry, really.
All right, thanks. So indeed, the logistics, formulations, all of these parameters that we take for granted actually are not, right? We need to work it out. Actually, any burning question from the audience? Well, I have one unprepared question for the panel because I like to surprise the panelists. Probably we are going to, thinking about the types of capacity, when the industry developed monoclonals, we totally miserably failed at predicting the required capacity, and hence pharmaceutical companies were crying for more capacity. How are we first of all, are we prepared as an industry to commercialize all of these products that will hit the market pretty much at the same time?
Yeah, it's a great question. Capacity is an issue because we don't even know what processes we're going to be following in 3 to 5 years. So you're asking us to borrow the term from Wayne Gretzky, skate to where the puck will be, and using processes that may have not even been invented yet. So it's really hard to be predictive. I can guarantee that we will not be right on what capacity is necessary. But I think that the model, if you look at what Lonza does and some of the other folks, is you have to build as flexible a facility as you can. Everyone we've ever spoken with has always said, we recognize that we'll be building whatever factory we build or whatever production footprint we build, it will have to be flexible for multiple different types of cell and therapies, whether it's TCR, TIL, or CAR-T, going through the same facility. And it will have to be adaptable so that in a year's time, if we have to change the process or if we have to bring in new platforms for manufacturing, that the facility will not be the bottleneck. The facility and that capacity will not be an obstacle. So we won't get it right, but we'll be adaptable.
Yeah, that's a great view.
I'll follow on from what Phil was saying there, is that, again, if you understand your key critical attributes of your product, you don't have to then do new trials for every single change you've done in the manufacturing process. And that's key for us as an industry to reduce the cost of these products getting back to market and are still constantly improving and making better products.
So what is Lonza ready for the challenge?
I mean, this is one of my most favorite topics, as you can imagine, right? Because it's all about running a business, right? And making sure you enable the industry. Because if there is no capacity available, these groups are ready to commercialize, and all of a sudden you can't get the product on the market, the industry is going to fail.
I mean, that's obviously an important point, because you need to do the CapEx investment immediately. Yeah. For example, because you have an operational role at Lonza and also Janet as well. So I'd like to hear your views on how you anticipate on CapEx expenses.
So there are two models, right? You build and then they will come. Not such a great model in my opinion. Or you develop, as I said before, you develop commercialization strategies where you can prepare early enough together with your partner when you need capacity, when you start building. And Lonza uses the shell model, right? So we build shells, I mean, substantial CapEx involved, but at least you have the shell and then you build out specifically for clients. Why don't you build clean rooms and then wait till they come? Because, as Phil said, there are so many different processes. We are seeing enormous amounts of process changes, and these are radical process changes. This is not just switching out one vessel against another one, where we move now from the 2D to the 3D. And as you can imagine, if you do 3D manufacturing versus 2D manufacturing, your footprint is much, much smaller. Right? So you build all of this, you build all these clean rooms, then to figure out that you have way, way too much capacity. build out clean rooms, which you then have to modify. And again, a lot of CapEx involved. So the best thing is you have empty shells, you develop your strategies with the cell therapy or gene therapy companies so that you can prepare and you have it ready, customized on time.
Janet, what's your view of Roslin managing CapEx and managing available capacities?
No, I think to Thomas's point, I think you really have to look at your existing client base and their path through to commercial and actually work with them and the capacity they need. And that's the lower risk strategy. But I mean, we've been involved in this field for 10 years, and in the last year we really just see the huge demand for manufacturing space, and particularly right through to commercial. And I think you do have to have a sensible approach in terms of having that kind of modular build of your clean room space as you need it to the design you need. And the size of clean room is also critical as well. And I think you also have to have a mindset of 10 years' time, will big clean rooms be the future? It might be, some technology that GE developed that has us all in non-clean room standard labs manufacturing these therapies. So you have to understand the market, understand where things are going. There is an element of risk. I mean, we're at the point now where we're ready to expand. We just need more capacity, and all that needs is investment. And it's just getting that right. And I think now is the time to have that capacity ready, I think.
All right, thanks. Any remark or question from the audience on this particular topic? Yes, over there.
What you're saying is lovely, but if I'm doing an investment model, I'm after volume and price and cost of goods. So can you talk about the actual numbers that you're mentioning here? Because I can't see that some of these therapies are going to be produced in 2D in the sort of volumes that investors expect at the prices they expect. Perhaps you could comment about that.
That's a great question. Let's move on to how we can decrease. We know how to produce those things. Great. How can we make them affordable? Right? In terms of process development, in terms of industrialization. Phil.
Sure. So I'll say something a bit provocative. I think that I think cost of goods is a bit of a siren song that everybody talks about. And yes, I acknowledge absolutely what you're saying. For these therapies in the future, there will have to be they have to be affordable. They cannot put such a stress on the health system. But we forget the context of curability, long-term durability of these therapies. So I think there's a price model that needs to still get worked out. But with that said, I think that the siren song of cost of manufacturing, if we're focused exclusively on reducing the cost of production, we really miss the opportunity. To me, it's all about improving the process and de-risking the process. What does that mean? It means closing systems. It means connecting systems, taking labor out of the process, simplifying the process. Instead of having a 20-step process, have a 10-step process. Do whatever you can with the focus being on the quality attributes and reducing the risk of production. And I think the benefit of that thinking will be a cost of goods that will be much more in line with what future expectations will be. And the reason I come at it from a risk perspective and not a cost perspective is when you start to introduce cost as the key metric that you're chasing, you can start making bad process decisions. And I think by necessarily going after the appropriate and the best possible process, you can then start to see the obvious benefits of the, pardon me, you start to see the benefits of now we know what we should be automating. Now we know where we can start industrialization practices. Now we really, as a company like GE that thinks about industrialization, we have that opportunity to say, now that we've figured out the process and the de-risk process, now we can start tackling cost of goods. But I wouldn't start there.
I'd sort of follow on from that. I'd say, actually, the cost of making most of these cell therapies is probably competitive already. We're already making products that are equivalent to, but have longer therapeutic advantages to the products that are being infused for these therapies now. So I don't think that's necessarily a barrier to investment now. I'd also say that we are making limited numbers per year, so obviously we can scale and reduce costs in that sense. And there's lots of technology advantages that we in-house have that we know that we can bring to the market, but also in terms of where we know that these processes and products will go. So I think it's not necessarily a limit to investment.
This is, I mean, I 100% agree with Phil, 100%. This is a topic that comes up not often enough within the right environment. Because there's always the assumption we figure this out later. If, and again, I sound like a broken record, if you don't have a manufacturing strategy, and I'm not talking again phase one, if you don't have thought through how many patients you want to treat, where do you want to treat this, what's the scale of it, what capex will you need, what do you need to build, are you going to do this in-house or external, what can I actually ever get for this treatment? If you don't model all of this, and again, it doesn't have to be precise. If you don't have models like this, you forget to focus on the right things. And we see this over and over and over again. And this is getting so extreme that some of these cell therapy, gene therapy companies come to the realization there is no way that they can ever get this reimbursed. And this is already at a very late stage. So you need a drastic, radical change all of a sudden in order to bring your cost of goods down, that you have a margin left. And that's a huge challenge. And I mean, Phil said it in shorter words, in a few words.
For the first time ever.
Well, actually, that's an important point. If we just think in terms of CAR T cells, right, which is a very personalized type of treatment and probably more expensive to manufacture than MSCs or HSCs, right? One tendency is to say, well, we want to develop universal CAR T cells, which is, it's one way, I would say, for business to drive the science that needs to go behind. But before we go to this point between autologous and allogeneic therapy, I would like to see Janet's point of view regarding Roslin.
So I think in terms of manufacturing costs, the greatest cost is really your clean room space. And the longer your process, the longer time it's in that space, and therefore the more expensive it becomes. But I think looking forward, if you think of the costs of goods at the moment, with any new technology, it's always more expensive at the start. And although we've been in this field for a while, we are still in that early stage when it comes to manufacture. And I think as time goes on, we'll get greater efficiencies, and actually we'll find that the cost of goods significantly reduces. But to the other point, in terms of actually sort of value for money, we need to look at the end overall cost of that product, and then the cost if that patient didn't have the treatment, for them being sort of looked after for years to come. So I think it's a complex model, but looking specifically at the manufacturing, I think manufacturing costs will come down, and I think that's inevitable.
I want to make one point to your last topic you mentioned. It's cell therapy manufacturing is unlike biologics manufacturing. In biologics manufacturing, in a bioreactor, you increase yields, and we have shown this historically. You have enormous increases over time by making some modifications to it. And these are not radical changes, because in the end, it's still a vessel where you have your stuff in there, right? With cell therapy, everything is so customized. You cannot just say, oh, in order to get a higher yield, I totally switch this part out. This is if you're in commercial phase, if you're in phase 3, you can't really do this anymore. So there is not a lot of yield improvement at very late stages.
Any comments or questions from the audience? So let's build a little bit more about autologous therapies. Is that commercially sustainable?
Yeah, I think yes. I think to address what we've just been talking about, eventually they are absolutely commercializable, because again, if you think from the therapeutic benefit, they're non-rejected, they're customized, they're personalized, they're precision. I think the world has seen that precision medicine works. I think that wholesale uptake and sort of adoption of these approaches will come. I think we can't just limit ourselves to thinking about the manufacturing part of that, because there is this vein-to-vein logistics, supply management, scheduling, orchestrated dance that has to take place between the producers, the clinicians, the various logistics providers. So the short answer to your question, yes, I do believe it will happen. I think that there's no reason to expect that it wouldn't. And I think that along the way, lots of new things will be invented and discovered to sort of facilitate that.
So perhaps one way is to separate the service component from the product component and have the best entity, hospital, biotechnology company, to manage whichever of these components are most efficient at.
Well, think of it as an ecosystem. It's what are all the parts, and when you move a piece, when you put pressure on one side, what happens in the rest of the organism, and we'll figure it out. I mean, these are industrialization challenges. These are things that are doable.
What's the view of a biotech company?
Well, I'd say we only have to look at the blood industry, although it's an old industry, and producing 22 million products a year isn't a small number, and that seems to be sustainable, I think.
Okay.
So I think those sorts of models have already been done. I think the biggest difference in whether you go allo or auto is more going to be what your product is. I mean, MSCs are probably going to be an allo product, because they don't have the same costs associated with managing graft versus host disease that, say, a CAR T would.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the view of a global manufacturer?
Again, exactly what Phil said. And that's why GE, Lonza, others are heavily investing in figuring out how to industrialize autologous cell therapy. I mean, we have been working with autologous clients. We know the challenges, they know the challenges, and we took this as an opportunity to say, okay, this is not sustainable. There is no way the way it is done right now is sustainable. And all the points Phil said are important. It's not just the manufacturing, it's the logistics around it. And there will be not only GE, there will be others who will work on solutions in order to make this a sustainable business.
Thanks. And I suppose for Roslin, it's exactly the same case. You have different clients and you have the right capabilities.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I have anything more to add, really. It's pretty much captured.
Any burning question from the audience? Because I would like to switch to something different, which we tend to forget, which is quality control, because it's about quality analysis, quality control. How do we manage this quality? Because the industry has spent a lot of energy making this process, developing these processes, developing these therapeutics, thinking of CapEx and so on. But we tend to forget the downstream of it, which is QA, QC. So what is the right approach here? Let's start again with you, Phil.
Sure. So one of my favorite business luminaries, Peter Drucker, once said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And this is like any other process, right? It's and then to put Bob Preddy on the spot here for a second, we talk about the product, the process being the product, and Bob once said, no, we've got to evolve the industry to a point where the product is the product, and we understand those quality metrics and the performance metrics. I think if you fast forward to a few years, somebody will figure out a gadget that can tell you if the cell is comparable to the cell that we made in a different process, and there will be better recognition and awareness and understanding of what the cell is, what are the key quality attributes. We'll be able to measure them, and then we'll be able to introduce changes to that, and the product will become the product. So I think it's critical, but we don't have necessarily the quality and the characterization tools and technologies that we need.
All right. I mean, there is an initiative at ARM to really start to think in terms of standards. Yeah. All right, and that's very important. Standards are very useful when they're equally shared everywhere globally, right? So that's an important point. And one measure that's important as well is potency. So how do you measure potency at CTL?
So potency is probably one of the often least understood parts of these therapies. And in TIL therapy, because we're effectively using the product's own cross-target efficacy rather than looking at for a specific antigen, potency is far more measured in looking at the upregulation of different signaling chains rather than looking at specific killing function, because you don't know what you're targeting. So you're looking at how that cell is responding when it's already on its tumour. So you're already getting that activation from the tumour, and then you're looking for how the signalling is changing, and that gives you an understanding of which pathways that T cell is going through. But those molecular changes and the speed of doing them in a live setting is something that has to become the next standard, so that we can say the product that's going through the process, as soon as it's, especially if you're using fresh products, as soon as it's going out the door, is going to be suitable for the treatment.
Same question for Lonza. How do you measure potency? And beyond potency, how do you assess the quality of the raw materials? Because good quality in is a guarantee. It's a fundamental for good quality out.
Yeah. I mean, from a raw material perspective, I mean, we follow pretty much what has been established for biologics, or mostly biologics, right? So you follow these guidelines and policies to make sure that you have the right raw material, you have the right quality. From a potency perspective, the challenge is, of course, that everyone is aware of. It's just extremely hard to come up with the right potency assay, and there's quite some struggle. I mean, but we will get there as well. And yeah.
Thanks. I see we have a burning question here from the audience.
Thank you very much. So I'm not an investor, but I'm a manufacturing person, work for GlaxoSmithKline. One of the things I'd be interested before the panel disappear is, I often hear it's difficult to get investment into manufacturing. So if I was an investor, why would I invest in manufacturing?
That's a great final question. Janet.
I think that from an investor's perspective, there are a number of new therapies coming through. I mean, the field's just dramatically expanding, and not all of those. There's a risk in investing in therapies, but investing in a manufacturer, a CMO, we're providing a platform for all of these therapies coming through, and actually, in some ways, that de-risks it. There's actually an opportunity to take advantage of this really growing field, but actually not have the risk of investing specifically in a product that I mean, I hope they all succeed, but the chances of them all succeeding are probably minimal.
Lonza?
I mean, for an investor, the most important thing is the return, right? So how can I generate return by investing in manufacturing? Manufacturing for gene and cell therapy is at the core, right? It's one of the most important pieces, and there is a lot of high value added from a manufacturer, so you can assume there is a healthy margin. So in the end, it might make sense to invest in manufacturing.
Phil?
Well, I would sort of come at it in a similar light, but ask a question. Is the question about investing in your own capacity to manage and have your own control over the production process, or is it thinking more as an investment opportunity to invest in capacity, whether it's internal or external to the business? I think the metric we used at Lonza, which I thought was quite helpful, was the return on net operating assets. It's how efficiently can you use the production footprint that you have. And like any other business metric, as if you're optimizing that, working with a CMO gives you the opportunity when you don't have the demand to keep your plant operating at full capacity, you gain an efficiency. At some point, as you are fully utilizing a plant, you may want to vertically integrate that capability into your own infrastructure and then get the benefit of that efficiency.
And Ryan, what's the view of a small biotech regarding your own manufacturing capacity?
I suppose you're also investing in how you want those processes to come into your products as well. So you might invest in manufacturing because you actually want to have an element of control of how the processes that oversee how the new products and manufacturing processes get involved, so they fit with your pathways in the future, so that you don't end up having to reinvent the wheel and change the manufacturing process later on because it's not going to fit your pathways. So I think that's where the key is, because these are partnerships as much as anything. It's about having influence in that partnership, so that's why you're investing in it.
So we'll take one last minute, and that's going to be the final line of question for our panel. Just one word per panelist, so 4 words, right? What's the most important issue in terms of manufacturing for each one of you? We're going to start with a biotech company.
One word. Onomatopoeia, no. It's like, I'll go to an old favorite. I'll say ecosystem. It's thinking in the entirety.
Ecosystem. Thank you.
I'll say planning.
Planning. Okay.
Strategy.
Strategy.
Communication.
Communication. I think we've covered it everything, right? Let's thank our panel for brilliant discussion.